You're listening to the Apple Insider Podcast.
Welcome to our show where we discuss the latest news about Apple, iPhone, iPad, Mac, and more. We're recording on Thursday, July 30th, 2015. I'm your host, Victor Marks, and joining me today are managing editor Neil Hughes. Hey, Neil.
Hey, how's it going?
I'm so glad you're here. And Mikey Campbell.
Hey, guys.
Fantastic. So, I saw this week that the Apple Watch is coming to Best Buy August 7th. That's coming up fast.
Yeah, they're expanding the retail availability pretty quickly, I think.
So how many stores is it coming to?
It's going to be a limited number of stores at first, and then I think it's 300 by the end of the year.
So is this sort of like a 100-store trial, or is it simply just a slow rollout because of limited supply?
Just expansion as they normally do. If you look at the watch wasn't even available in retail stores for Apple first, and then it came to those stores. So it's just as they ramp up production. And I think a big part of it, too, is they're trying to figure out demand for the different configurations. Because you got to remember, this is a product that doesn't come where you buy the band and the watch separately. It all comes in one box. So those are all multiple types of configurations that you could get. And they're going to need some sort of, established sales to figure out what's popular and what people want.
Let me ask, where do you think it goes in store? Because currently there's sort of the Apple store within a store, and there's also the watch section where they have the Samsung Galaxy Gear 2, they have the Moto 360, they have the Pebble and Pebble Time. And how do you think this thing gets merchandised?
I'm sure Apple has a deal that it goes in the Apple section. Because, the iPads and stuff aren't with the other generic tablets, if you will.
Yeah, it's not going to be featured next to the Samsung Galaxy. That's never going to happen.
Yeah, because, it's not really it's not meant to stand alone by itself as a device, even in Apple stores, so...
Yeah, it needs an iPhone to operate, so...
Okay, I was thinking about what this does to the Samsung Gear and the Moto 360 and Pebble, because those have been the mainstays for smartwatches within Best Buy. And if they're not even in the same section, then it's pretty easy to guess that all the traffic goes back to the Apple Watch to see it there. And if you're looking for something else, you're not even in that part of the store.
Is there even a Apple product that's sold outside of the Apple section in Best Buy stores? Maybe the iPod?
I think it's all basically in the same area, at least at my Best Buy.
So the way that these are arranged in some of the ones I've been to has been that you get the iPad area of things, you get the Android tablet area with the Samsung and Asus transformers, and then you get another area that is all of the Mac stuff and all of the accessories that go along with that, Airport Expresses and adapter cables and so forth, on one of the gondolas. That the tablets and Macs, the iPads and the Macs, are arranged on wooden tables as end caps, basically. And there's sort of an Android tablet island between the two.
Yeah, I think I've seen iPods separately, but they were kind of a legacy device that was around before these store-within-a stores. So I don't think you're going to see that with the watch, though. I think the watch is pretty tightly integrated with the rest of the ecosystem, and it requires an iPhone, so you're going to see it in that same Apple section.
Yeah, and all of the iPod and iPod accessory stuff it used to be a separate buyer and a separate group, but it's been sort of subsumed into the mobile buyers world. So all of the guys that handle the cell phones also manage that section.
I wonder if they're going to be able to get the demo racks or the demo display units with the iPad mini at Best Buy.
Oh, you mean the modified iPad mini display fixture?
Yeah.
I would say probably, just because they put out the iPads that are special iPad 2s in the acrylic fixture.
But these are like special watch fixtures where it's a
yeah, it has a bunch of
stuff.
Yeah, no,
I know. It does, but
and I heard previously that they were kind of limited. I think each store, on launch, each store got like 2 of those, I think. I guess supplies were limited since it was a bespoke item.
2 to 4 of them, yeah. I've seen 4 in a store.
Well, in the first demos for the watches, too, weren't even functional watches. They just ran through. It was just a screen that ran through a bunch of displays of what it could do. So I mean, it's pretty obvious that when this product was announced, it was hard for them to ramp up the production of it. They didn't even have them in stores for the try-ons, proper watches. Now they're gradually expanding. It was online first. Now it's in stores. Now it's coming to Best Buy. It's expanding internationally. So just ramping up production quickly and probably figuring out what's going to be the most popular item for people heading into the holidays.
Cool. So I currently own an iPad Mini 2 and an iPad Air. And I'm looking forward to an iPad Mini 4. So tell me what I can expect.
You can expect it to not be the joke that the iPad Mini 3 was.
Could go on.
Well, I mean,
you're clearly opinionated.
Well, look at their current lineup, right? You can get an iPad Mini 3, which has Touch ID and an A5 processor, right? Or is it an A6 or whatever it is? For you can get it for $400. Okay, then you can get the same exact iPad, same form factor, same screen resolution, same thickness, same chip, same everything for $299. The only difference for an extra $100 is Touch ID. I mean, who would pay that $100 for Touch ID? That's insane. So I don't know why they did that. I think that last year's upgrade was a mistake, and hopefully they fix it this year.
I think they need to push out the Air 2, and I think the Mini wasn't ripe for refresh at that time, but they still had to have a cohesive lineup, I think. Because they didn't... I think that... it was a bit staggered last year.
Well, the Air 2 became thinner, even thinner in the Air, and it got the A8X processor, which was better than the A8 found in the iPhone 6, right?
Yeah.
So they gave it a souped-up processor. They made it thinner. They gave it a better graphics performance than the iPhone 6. And then they could have just put a standard A8 in the iPad Mini. They didn't even do that. It was a huge mistake, and I don't know why they didn't do it, because they were already producing enough A8s for the iPhone 6, iPhone 6 Plus, and iPad Air 2. They should have just put it in the iPad Mini 3 and made that the $400 model, but instead they gave it the same chip as the year before, the same form factor, and it just added Touch ID. It was a stupid mistake on their part, and you can see iPad sales dwindling, and I don't know that that's the cause of it, but I'm sure it didn't help, because who was going to pay $400 for that thing?
Well, especially when what's the benefit of Touch ID on an iPad Mini at that time?
Yeah, I mean, it has Apple Pay for buying through apps and stuff like that, and secure login, but I feel like Touch ID on the iPad, it's fine. I don't like it because it kind of ruins the...
you like your smart cover,
I like the
don't
smart
you?
cover unlock, but I feel like my iPad never really leaves my house much anyhow, so it's not like a phone where you lose it and somebody can pick it up and get all your information or whatever. My iPad if someone's breaking into my house, they're going to take more on the iPad, So it doesn't really. I feel like Android has a feature where they have like safe zones where you can unlock your phone if it's on a trusted Wi-Fi network, for example, where it doesn't need secure unlock. And I feel like that would be a good feature for an iPad, where you could say something like, "Oh, allow it to unlock because I'm on my home Wi-Fi and don't require me to use Touch ID."
I still think I want this iPad Mini 4.
No, I think it's going to be a good upgrade.
I do.
The rumor that came out this past weekend is that it's basically going to be a miniature iPad Air 2, which would give it probably not the A8X processor. Maybe it will get it. Who knows? But the A8 chip that's in the iPhone 6 and Touch ID, which it already has, and presumably a little bit thinner and stuff like that. But, I mean, the rest of the rumor is that it's going to be a scaled-down iPad Air 2. Well, isn't the iPad Mini already a scale? I mean, isn't the iPad Air already a scaled-up iPad Mini? The iPad Air was designed after the iPad Mini, so...
I think the last, the Air 2 was pretty significant jump as far as between the Air 1 and the Air 2. I think it kind of slid back into that kind of flagship spot.
Oh, yeah, definitely. They justified the $500 price on it. And it's a great tablet. I have an Air 2, and I'm really happy with it. And the thinness is incredible. It came at a little cost to battery life. The battery life isn't as long as it is on the Air, but it's a really nice tablet. But, this idea that it's a a larger iPad Air 2. Well, the iPad Air 2 is already, or a smaller iPad Air 2. I mean, they look the same, don't they? You could put them. You could take a photo of one if you didn't have it for scale. You wouldn't know the difference anyhow if you're looking at the front of it.
So let me ask. I'm telling you, I'm an interested buyer. I've already qualified myself as someone who's going to go out and spend the money. Let me ask. Why do I get the iPad Air 3 that we're potentially discussing as having maybe an A9 chip instead of the iPad Mini 4? What, and the things that I'm thinking about are, you already know me. You know that I want to try and use every multitasking feature that they've given us. You know that I want to try and make it a replacement for my Mac, which we know is pushing the limits, but I want to try. Which one do you guide me to and why?
Oh, well, I mean, it's kind of like when the first Mini came out, right? I mean, people were having this quandary. It's like,
well, but the first Mini was a horribly underpowered iPad 2.
Yeah,
so
but I think what you're talking about is the form factor. I mean, well, things that you want to do, I would say that are a bit different than the regular consumer. But for you, I would probably lean towards a full-size iPad, since you you're going for the whole laptop replacement thing, and I just don't think a Mini can. It doesn't have enough horsepower to do that. I mean, even the screen itself, it's just too small to make it your primary computing device, I think.
I think you need to look at the current MacBook lineup, right? You have a MacBook Air, which is the entry-level model, and it's not as powerful as a MacBook Pro. And I think that you are seeing where Apple is trying to distinguish more between the iPad Air, although the names are backwards because of the products. But the Air is the laptop replacement, right? And the Mini is more of a traditional tablet, I guess, is the way you look at it. It's just that the iPad Air is more powerful, and I would imagine that they're going to continue that this year. So if they put last year's chip in this year's iPad Mini, then presumably they'd put an A9 in this year's iPad Air 3 or whatever they're going to call it. So you'd have a more powerful tablet, and it would stand out a little more from the Mini. And Apple wants to upsell. They want you to look and go, do I want to spend $400 on a Mini, or do I want to spend another $100 and then get a bigger screen and a more powerful tablet?
I wonder if they're going to do I wonder if they're going to cut the pencil into quarters this time for the ad. Instead of half, they're just going to slice it down into a quarter.
I don't know that they're going to get any thinner. I don't know that you need to get any thinner. Lighter, sure.
You need all the thinness.
Yeah, it's a little extreme on the iPad Air. Yeah, the thinness is impressive on the iPad Air 2, and it's actually noticeable from the original iPad Air, which is an accomplishment in and of itself, because the iPad Air was really impressive when it came out. I don't know that it needs to be any thinner. Let's focus on improving the battery life.
Right, but batteries, they take up space, yes?
Well, but remember when the iPad came out and it was such a big deal that it lasted 10 hours, and now you have laptops that last like 15, 16 hours. So the tables have kind of turned, right? It used to be that the iPad was a huge deal. You'd never have a laptop that would last 10 hours in one usage. And now if you get a MacBook Air, I think that thing has like 15, 16 hours of uptime. So I feel like the balance needs to shift back again towards these tablets and give them even longer battery life, because as it stands right now, in terms of actual usage, you would actually get more out of a lot of laptops than you would an iPad.
I find my experience with my MacBook Air from last year is not the 15 hours.
Well, I mean, that's the Wi-Fi streaming a movie, test or whatever that they do. I mean, it's not processor intensive, but I mean, what are you getting on uptime for your MacBook Air? Probably, 8, 9 hours?
I'm going to actually look now, because I don't think I get 8 hours. I think...
Don't they advertise like 15 hours for the MacBook Air?
Well, they advertise.
Yeah.
And of course, energy and the activity monitor doesn't really tell you. Although it kind of tells you, right? It says activity monitor applications the last 8 hours, and the little chart shows for the last 12 hours. And I saw within the last 12 hours where I had full charge and went back down to 5% and back up to full charge again.
How long did that take?
It looks like I ran out of battery within 6 hours.
And you have what, 12 or not, or
This is the 11-inch MacBook Air. It is about this Mac. It is a early 2014 1.4 gigahertz i5 with 4 gig of RAM and 256 gig hard drive.
That's not bad. I mean, Apple quotes that at 9 hours, I think, for the 11. So that's pretty good. I mean, I get
6 hours is reasonable then.
I mean, it depends what you're doing with it, but I would assume so. I mean, I get like 2 or 3 hours on my MacBook Pro, but I'm doing a lot of stuff at the same time.
Yeah, it depends on what you're doing.
Well, the most impact came from Safari.
Shocker.
So resource hog.
It's not Google Chrome.
So the new MacBook is advertised at up to 9 hours of wireless web, up to 10 hours of iTunes movie playback, up to 30 days of standby. I mean, that's pretty comparable to an iPad, right? They say, what, 10 hours of usage on an iPad?
It depends on the iPad. For
right.
For the new iPad Air 2, I think it's like, let me think. I'm gonna check this out.
Well, I'm looking right now at.
I think it's like 10. I think it's like 10 hours or something. Yeah, it's 10 hours.
So for the 13-inch MacBook Air, the brand new one, Apple's website advertises up to 12 hours of wireless web and up to 12 hours of iTunes movie playback. So the MacBook Air, unsurprisingly because it's larger than the MacBook, gets slightly better battery life.
Even though the MacBook has the laminated battery that goes into all of the edges and
no
corners.
fan and very small parts. Yeah, it's just more room for a battery in there, right?
Yeah, the whole thing is a battery, basically.
Right. And, well, the same thing for the iPad.
To be fair, the same is the truth for the iPad.
Yeah.
Yeah. Although it is thinner.
Right. I mean, a lot thinner. But, I mean, that new MacBook is an impressive achievement, one port aside. You just wonder, we're looking at, where these next iPads are supposedly going to be. You wonder, where does it go? The future is as some sort of a laptop replacement, or what is it, right? And so we look at the iPad Pro that we keep talking about, and I think that serves as an even more of a laptop replacement, some sort of a docking station or something like that. I'm looking right now, the iPad Air 2 is rated up to 10 hours of surfing the web on Wi-Fi, watching video, or listening to music, and up to 9 hours on cellular data. So the MacBook Air is rated with a better battery life than the iPad Air 2. And it's comparable to the MacBook. So again, I mean, think about when the first iPad came out. That's what I'm saying. 10 hours was like mind-blowing that a laptop would last that long. And now they're rating their laptops at just that same, Intel's chips have gotten that much more efficient. So I think that Apple needs to, focus on the efficiency with these future chips and try to eke out a little bit more battery life from all their devices, because you can see it really improving in the computer space and in the Mac space and Windows PCs as well, but you haven't seen it improve to the same degree for the iPad. Every iPad has been 10 hours of battery life. They keep making the battery smaller, so it's an accomplishment, but I think they need to start boosting it up. That's where I'd like to see it go.
So I wonder, does the energy savings and conservation that we see in iOS 9 have an impact there? We've been talking about that with regard to the phone and having a phone battery last longer.
Yeah, they say it's another 1 to 2 hours of battery uptime just in running iOS 9. But then we also have a new option in there for a low power mode. And I wrote an article about this yesterday at Tip, where you can actually turn on low power mode at any point. So let's say you're going out for the day and you know that you're not going to be able to charge anytime soon. You can run low power mode from 100% all the way down. And the chip runs about 40% slower than at full speed. And so it just squeezes out a little bit more battery life. Apple hasn't said how much more battery life you get from low power mode if you were to run it from like 100%. But there are a lot more efficiencies in iOS 9 that are going to make iPads and iPhones last even longer.
We talked about how having Touch ID on the iPads can prevent theft. And I want to lead into our talking about Alarm.com. Alarm.com has been very nice to us. They've been sponsoring us for the past several episodes. And, we've talked about them a lot, but they really are. They're trusted by over 2.3 million subscribers. They are the leading smart home security provider. Their technology is more reliable and secure than traditional systems. They use 100% dedicated cellular connection into your home, so you're not vulnerable to cut lines or down broadband connection. And the accounts are professionally monitored, so a real person at a central monitoring station will help get emergency response to your home in case of an emergency. Instead of bouncing between 5 or 6 different apps, Alarm.com integrates everything into its top-rated mobile apps. You can control security, thermostat, video monitoring, lights, locks, and even your garage door. Alarm.com systems are professionally installed and maintained by trusted security experts, so you're not stuck inside trying to figure out how to do your own self-install. If you're listening to this program, you probably love Apple and the way they innovate, and Alarm.com does too. They pioneered the smart home security space. They were the first to launch a native app to control your home. They launched the first location-based automation feature, and they were the first smart home app for the Apple Watch. Alarm.com is the leading technology provider of smart home security, and they have sold through over 5,000 trusted security professionals across the U.S. If you want to see what it's like to control your home from your Apple Watch, Alarm.com has a demo on their site you can check out. If you're interested in having a smarter home, sign up for Smart Home Security this month and receive a free smart thermostat. Go to alarm.com/insider to find a dealer that's right for you. Alarm.com, your home in your hands. And that watch demo keeps coming up. We talked about that last week and how incredible it was seeing them open the garage door on the screen of the watch.
It's the future.
I like the future.
The future is pretty neat. People like to say, where are my flying cars? But the future has snuck up on us, hasn't it?
Well, if you were born any time after the 1960s, you were not promised a flying car. You were promised a dystopian, authoritarian nightmare. I'm sorry, but if you were promised a flying car, you were born in the 1930s.
Well, if you run Android, you're living that nightmare.
There you go. And so I'm going to skip around a little bit. We have an agenda of articles that we follow, but I'm going to skip right ahead. If you have Android, you're living that dystopian future. Tell me about it.
Well, there were a couple of vulnerabilities that came out this week. One is estimated to affect more than half of Android users, and the other one affects 95% of them. 950 million phones and tablets. And
I want to repeat that number.
Yeah.
950 million devices.
Yeah, it's pretty scary. The big one is called stage fright. It's a vulnerability that can be sent to a device just via MMS. So you send a picture message to a phone, and they don't even have to open it. All it has to do is Android will just show the notification at the top of the screen, and once that appears, the phone has been compromised.
Now, this is for all Android versions across all the different devices out there?
This affects Android 2.2 and up. Google has fixed it in the latest builds of Android, so within the last month or something. But the problem is nobody has that. So unless you're running, one of these modded or just clean versions of Android that's out there, if you have a Samsung phone, for example, and you're getting TouchWiz on your phone, you're held back from the latest updates. And if your phone is more than a year old, then a manufacturer like Samsung won't even bother updating your phone, because why would they want to update your phone? They make all their money through selling you new phones. So, a lot of people are potentially affected by this. There's no exploits out in the wild yet, so no need to panic yet, I guess. But I think people that have Android phones should probably be pretty terrified of this kind of thing, just because if you're running a phone that's a year and a half old, it may never get updated, and you may always be vulnerable to this security issue. And it's terrifying.
Well, I remember Heartbleed. When Heartbleed happened last year, Google said, we're updating this for phones running KitKat. If you're on Jelly Bean or Ice Cream Sandwich or Gingerbread, go fish. And you had to be on the newest stuff or else, basically. And that was Google's own answer to the problem. That doesn't take into account what you're saying about TouchWiz or Tizen or any of the other interfaces.
Tizen?
I'm sorry, Tizen's its own thing.
Tizen.
I just had to say it. Tizen. You're just teasing me now. But the real problem with Android updates is that they update for Nexus, they update AOSP, and then Samsung and HTC and the like go ahead and adjust it for their distribution, and then roll it out to carriers who then have to approve whether or not it's going to get pushed out over the air. And so you have all these layers of approval that have to happen, which means you may never see the update.
And look at it from Samsung's perspective. I mean, how many phones does that company sell, right?
Yeah.
They have phones that...
They have all the phones.
Yeah, and they have gimmicky features on a lot of the phones and stuff like that. Heart rate monitors on the back of it that you put your finger against and crazy stuff like that. and it's all built into crazy software that they put into the phone that they create. And for them, it's a value add. They want somebody who doesn't really understand what they're talking about in technology to go to the store and say that they want a Samsung phone. They don't want them to go to the store and say they want an Android phone, right? And to let you know about how much most consumers understand, Droid is a term that Verizon owns. They licensed it from Lucasfilm, from the Star Wars films. And most people, when I talk to them that aren't really tech savvy, they'll just say they own a Droid, even though they have it on, T-Mobile or Sprint or AT&T. They just call it a Droid. They don't call it Android. People don't know. It's just branding at that point. And so for Samsung, it allows them to differentiate their product by having all this software on there. But the problem is you can't run the latest version of the OS. You can't update it because Samsung's not going to bother updating some phone that barely sold that came out 2 years ago.
Right. And I've been telling people that ask me if they want to buy an Android phone what they should get. And my answer is you get either a Nexus or you get a Motorola, because Motorola tries to adhere very closely to shipping stock Android. And because they do that, it makes it easier for them to get updates out. And also you're not getting a ruined experience. And other than, of course, the Android experience. But you need to do the other thing, which is really terrible, is run Cyanogen. If you run CyanogenMod, they update all the time. And, well, it's a pain for a lot of people to install who aren't, let's say, interested in doing that. No one especially wants to figure out how to fast boot and sideload an OS, but you can, and doing so means you may be more likely to get the update that would otherwise be held back from you.
Yeah, the people that found this stage fright vulnerability said the only phones that are protected from this are the ones running stock Android, CyanogenMod phones, which have been rooted, which is a process in and of itself just to keep, you have to root it every time you update. It's a nightmare.
Well, Cyanogen's not that bad for rooting.
It kind of is. If you want to have root access for stuff, I have a Nexus 7 tablet that I put in my car, and I can't update Android on it anymore because anytime I do, I lose access, and then I have to remove it from the dashboard. It's a nightmare.
Well, you don't want to update on that Nexus anyway because that Nexus 7 will perform slow.
And then the other two that you can run that are safe are forked versions of Android from Firefox OS is apparently safe, and then the Black Phone OS is safe.
Black Phone.
No one runs the Firefox OS.
Or Black Phone. So.
And I honestly...
Or CyanogenMod. I mean,
my dad... I put CyanogenMod on my dad's phone.
Okay, but you put your dad on there. He wasn't going to put his own phone on there. Come on.
He wanted to. He just didn't know what the hell he was doing.
Exactly. Nobody knows how to do that. I mean, listen, these things are fine. If you're a tinkerer or that kind of stuff, that's cool.
Yeah.
But the average person is not going to do this crap.
I agree.
When I was 20 years old, I would... you remember...
they're not going out to XDev forums and figuring out how to all do this.
What was that guy's name? He did a bunch of Windows tweaks back in the day. Black Viper was his name or something. And I would try to squeeze every bit of performance I had out of my Windows PC. So I'd go in and disable all the features so you could get more, that last 100 megabytes of RAM when you were playing a game. But I used to do this stuff a long time ago. I used to have a Windows 3.1 machine that I had a floppy disk for that would boot straight into DOS so I could play Doom without having my processor run slower. Because if you booted into Windows and then went to DOS, it would run slow. Right?
You're still running
so, I used to do all that crap when I had time on my hands, but now it's
Then you got married.
Yeah, it's Jesus, I'm 31 years old. I used to jailbreak my iPhone too. I don't have time for that stuff. There's not enough time in the day for me to do that or even worry about that kind of crap. And for the people that want to do that stuff, that want to jailbreak their phone or root their phone and run CyanogenMod and all that stuff, that's great. I think that's really cool, Linux enthusiasts and stuff. Personally, I don't have the time for it. And all you have to do is look at the stats. Apple says that 85% of people are running iOS 8 or later, and then 13% are running iOS 7. That means that there are 2% or 3% of devices or something out there that are running anything before iOS 7. So all the security updates and all the latest stuff, everybody has it, everybody's installed, and that's a huge difference from Android.
Yes, it is.
Hey, let's talk about these Steve Jobs movies.
All right, so there's a Steve Jobs trailer called The Man in the Machine, and it is going to be the centerpiece. No, it's not going to be the centerpiece. That's some other movie. Yep. There are too many Steve Jobs.
Well,
why are there so many Steve Jobs
The Ashton
movies?
Kutcher one doesn't count because it was a piece of crap.
Well, and it's also old now.
There are two Steve Jobs movies coming out. There is the dramatic retelling, which means that...
There's the Michael Fassbender movie.
Yes, a lot of the stuff in that is going to be made up and fictionalized for the purposes of our entertainment, because that's what Aaron Sorkin does. That film was chosen as the centerpiece of the New York Film Festival. That'll be at the Lincoln Center in August.
Are you going?
Actually, in September, I think. Yeah, I'm going to try to go. They told me that they might be able to get me in, so don't tell anybody, but I might be able to get in.
We won't tell anybody.
We won't tell any of our listeners.
I think that the festival starts at the end of September, and then it'll be screening in early October, like a week before it comes out in theaters. Because I think it comes out like October 9th. I think the screening of the New York Film Festival is October 3rd. It was chosen as the centerpiece. You know, they claim that it's because it's so great or whatever, but I'm sure they're still editing and probably shooting extra scenes or something. So at this point, it's just a publicity grab, I think, for them. But, you know, a lot of prestige on this movie, a lot of Academy Award winners involved. So I'm excited to see it. You know, I've ranted on here about Aaron Sorkin before and how crappy the newsroom is, but I also love The Social Network, even though it's not remotely historically accurate film. But the other movie, the trailer came out this week for Steve Jobs, The Man in the Machine, which is a documentary that uses footage combined with interviews about Steve Jobs. And this one's kind of controversial because it's screened at, was it South by Southwest, I think? And Eddie Hughes saw it and immediately went on Twitter and just bashed it and said that it was mean-spirited and not representative of the Steve Jobs that he knew.
Oh, so right on the nose then.
Right, yeah. And I want to see it. The guy who directed this documentary is responsible for some pretty great documentaries, including the Smartest Guys in the Room, the Enron one. And he also did the Going Clear documentary on Scientology that aired on HBO. So the guy has a history of doing pretty good documentaries. It sounds like it portrays Steve Jobs as a pretty mean guy, which I'm sure to a lot of people he was. I mean, he certainly earned that reputation. But the people that were close to him also argue that he kind of softened over the years and in his later years was a kinder, more gentler Steve Jobs. So I don't know. I'm excited to see both of them.
I saw the trailer for The Man in the Machine.
It's a good trailer.
It's a good trailer. I liked the actual footage of Jobs much more than the interviews about him, especially because, as you say, they can be cherry-picked for things that fit a narrative. You know, how many times we've heard the Steve Wozniak story of working on Atari and working on Breakout and being underpaid for it.
Yeah.
Right? Being told that he was going to get one thing and getting it, not realizing that Jobs got paid a lot more than he said for it, and being hurt by that. Okay, we know these stories are out there, but Wozniak's clearly forgiven Steve Jobs, and all of these other people who have their stories, they're true. I don't disagree that they're with their personal experiences, but I think that that's a limited view of a complex person, and I want to see something that shows more than just that one narrative, because we all hear that narrative. I'm kind of over it. I want to hear more about the full view.
But this is the problem. You need to take somebody's entire life and make it an interesting 2-hour movie. You need to have some sort of a narrative, right? You need to boil it down to something. You can't tell a good story without selectively choosing things.
Let me mention this. So a couple of days ago, I watched a hour-long movie that was put together by Dr. Michael Johnson, or Wave, as he's known on Twitter, at Dr. Wave. He's also the head of the Cartoon Art Museum in San Francisco. He's a person at Pixar who works on their technology there. And he put together a Next event that celebrated all of the cool things about Next Step and Next. And he had an hour-long session of interviewing people about Next, and of course, obviously, Steve Jobs and his time there, and also some of his time at Apple. And there was a segment on what it's like to demo for Steve, and what it's like to try and show off a product, and when the product has a bug and it crashes in front of him, and you damn well make sure that it never crashes again. And those kinds of stories were interesting because they weren't necessarily talking about this asshole of a man. They were talking about what it's like to interact with him, what it's like to be a part of trying to build something on an incredible timeline. And that was much more interesting to me than the narrative. And that's why I'm hesitant to go ahead and see things. I may see it, I may do it, but I'm hesitant when I hear that people who knew him say this is not representative.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they have to make it more appealing to a broader audience. But I mean, everything that I've heard about Steve, and then it's being an ass and all that stuff, I mean, sure. I mean, you can view it that way, but is there really any other way to get the things done that he got done? Is there another way to do it than perhaps being a taskmaster and being pushing everyone around him so incredibly hard, including himself? I mean, you come off brash and maybe a little ass-hatty, but I mean, in the end, the job gets done, and there's really no other way to do it. All great leaders are reviled at some point in time.
Well, I think it's not necessarily something as binary as that. It's you have to surround yourself with people smarter than you. You have to demand people live up to their total potential. And you have to really set an environment that says where you place your priorities, right? You place your priority on delivering the very best possible experience for the customer. You end up with one kind of product. You set your priorities on delivering a product that makes you the most profit margin. You end up with a very different kind of product because people over-optimize on cost-cutting versus over-optimizing on trying to make something that goes farther. And I've been in organizations that have made products both ways, and you end up with very different products.
Yeah,
and it's really...
it doesn't change the fact. I mean, it doesn't change the way...
It doesn't take an asshole to drive the product train to result in products that are good. If you read Creativity Inc., if you look at Pixar's process, they end up with fantastic products, and they are very exacting and very precise about what they want, but they're also not assholes to each other.
But does that explain Cars 2?
That's a good
when
question.
The crowd goes mild. Let's move on.
Brilliant. Okay, so I love Cars. You mentioned Cars 2. I don't like Cars 2.
That's what I call a segue, Victor.
But I love vehicles, and I know that Mikey used to have the Mustang. I've got the Cadillac with the manual 6-speed transmission. We've talked amongst ourselves about Tesla before. BMW, the i3, which is an atrocious vehicle to look at. It's ghastly. Have you seen that horrible thing on wheels, the BMW i3? I mean, it's striking that the i3 comes from the same company that made the i8, which is sexy.
Well, I mean... BMW's slide has it started with Bangle when he started making his organic designs.
That was the Fire and Ice or something like that design language from Bangle.
I mean, if they kept him on, I think it could have. If he completed his vision, I think it might have been something. But now it's like a bastardization of that, and it's just gotten out of hand.
The i3, you look at it, and it could be a Chevrolet Sonic, it could be a Spark, you just don't know. It's hideous. But there is something to it. Apple was eyeing it for platform engineering, which says that you buy the frame, you buy the basis, and you build your own body panels and crash zones and crush zones around it. So you don't have to do the hard work of putting together a platform. And this is something that all of the major auto manufacturers do. You know, there's the Sigma platform that GM has used across a whole line of vehicles. And it makes sense to do that because why reinvent, well, the wheel all over again? Hey. So what happened with this thing? They were going to use the i3 and then they didn't? What's the news?
They don't know exactly why they were talking with them, but from what I can gather is they were interested in i3 technology. So, I mean, BMW, like you said, is using a unique platform. I think they call it dual drive. I'm not sure what they call it. It's basically splits the drivetrain / battery and, wheelbase, everything from the passenger cabin. So you have two distinct parts that are then later produced and manufactured and assembled into one. So it's kind of the same idea as Chevy's lineup or Chevy, the Volt and some other concept cars that they have as far as, making the two parts separately and then joining them later. So what that, I guess for Apple would achieve is, I mean, they can use like the drivetrain from BMW, which is, I mean, the i3's the i3's powertrain is pretty good. I mean, have you driven one?
I have not.
Okay, I mean, it's pretty good. It's solid. It's
They had them at CES, and I meant to, but there were just too many things to do at CES.
It looks horrible, but I mean, it drives pretty well for an electric car. And what Apple could do is they could use that technology and, maybe insert their own batteries or whatnot, and then, lean on BMW's expertise in handling and, gearing and engines, things that they don't really particularly have any experience in dealing with, and perhaps roll out their own car, and also design the passenger cabin, which would be something you'd want to do in the case of an i3.
So let me ask, there was some rumor about Apple poaching battery technology employees.
Mm-hmm.
And there's been this back and forth about Apple hiring away people from Tesla, Tesla hiring away people from Apple. So,
well, I mean, yeah, I don't know. I mean, that whole situation is pretty incestuous. There's a lot of people going back and forth. But really, I think Apple is, I mean, we don't know exactly what they're doing, but if they were to build a car, they'd have to make some improvements on range, of course. Range is always the Achilles heel of any electric vehicle. Design, Tesla's a nice looking car. i3 is on the other end of the spectrum, of course. And then you have the middling vehicles that have been just converted to electric, like the Ford, I think that the electric Focus and
the electric Fusion.
I think they have a Focus too, right? That's electric, all electric.
I don't remember the Focus. When I'm looking at Focus, I'm looking for the ST models, but the Fusion is an electric vehicle.
Yeah, they have a version of the Fusion, and other cars like GM or the plug-in Prius from Toyota. They all look, I don't know, kind of futuristic in their own way, but also kind of ugly.
Dorky.
I was going to go with boring.
Yeah.
There's nothing inspiring about those.
Well, I mean, when the Prius first came out, it was an interesting looking car.
When the Prius first came out, it was.
And Toyota gave their designers on that project carte blanche. I
mean, the second gen Prius was a lot more normal looking, right? It had that big glass house in the back, but it was a swept back hatchback. The first Prius attempted to be a sedan with a trunk with a boot, and it was
this first gen was
ghastly.
I don't. But the second gen, Toyota actually wanted their designers to make a distinctive looking vehicle. They wanted them to make the car look like what we now think of as a hybrid. So I mean,
thank you, Toyota. Move.
Yeah,
that was it.
Thanks, Toyota, for that gem.
Give me an FRS, and then we'll talk.
Yeah, but I mean, so hopefully Johnny Ive's love of Fiat doesn't overwhelm the whole project, and we'll have like a big 500C.
Oh Lord,
esque vehicle, as far as design goes, but. Well, there's a lot of room.
Your warning is correct, though, because think about how much Brown influenced so many of the early iPods and things like that.
Well,
and the iMac was the old Brown speaker, so we're going to get a Fiat.
Fiat has its place in car design history, but I don't think it has the same stature as Braun does with consumer electronics.
I would agree. Why couldn't they give us a nice Alpha?
I don't know. I find their designs busy, unless it's like a Pininfarina design.
I'm saying.
Well, they could. I don't know. In any case, we don't know what's going on. They might not even build a car, but that they're interested in the i3 platform is quite intriguing because it speaks to a bit of their ambitions in that department. And it's if they are looking at
building a car. It just wouldn't be another, say, Volt or something like that. Something that's trying to be an electric car, but isn't really innovating in too many ways.
They're definitely looking at building a car. If it comes to market, we'll see. But I mean, why wouldn't they be?
I don't know. It's a weird thing getting into an industry that is not really. I don't know. It's just so it's so ingrained, and you're going against companies that have hundreds of years of history.
You mean like watches?
Well, I mean,
all
that
right,
is still to be proven.
Watches have been, they have many, many parts, but they don't have a wide-ranging number of suppliers, and they don't have a large number of regulatory issues, and they don't have a historical lock-on competition and labor problems. The automotive industry, think back to the Tucker story, had a lock-on competition, and that finally loosened up, and we got the imports in, but they had a lock-on labor with UAW, and I'm going to get a lot of people frustrated with me for just saying that sentence alone. But
dare you,
UAW and pensions and things like that have clearly been issues that GM has had to reckon with, and I'm just going to leave it at that. Because I think that's a fair statement that no one could deny, that labor relations and pensions have been an issue for the traditional big three. They've had to reckon with how to handle those issues moving forward. And also building process has been a big issue, where GM and Toyota had the joint NUMMI plant that is now where Tesla makes their products. Yeah. And that NUMMI plant created more cars at better quality with fewer workers than any of the other GM plants. And all of the other GM plants were run almost autonomously. And it was impossible for GM to bring the lessons of NUMMI back to the rest of the manufacturing line. And for a long time, people just simply working at GM simply disbelieved the notion that a car could be built any better than they were building them in Dearborn or Flint or wherever else manufacturing was being done.
Interestingly, the BMW, the i factory that they have for the i3 and part of the i8 is actually almost... it's almost completely automated, so it's quite interesting. So, I mean, you have that. Apple could, or they could task Foxconn to build out the Apple
they certainly could. The thing with cars is that traditionally you have separate manufacturers for many of the different parts. You get your accelerator pedal from Denso, you get your you get your interior made in-house, but you buy all the different parts from all kinds of different suppliers, right? Ignition core modules come from someone else.
You know where you don't buy your airbags from?
Takata?
Yeah. That's where you don't buy
yeah. Well, and you don't buy your airbags from Takata. You don't buy your seatbelts from, I forget who the manufacturer was that had a recall. There are all kinds of things that go on. And Apple can handle that. We always hear that Tim Cook is a supply chain wizard. Yeah. But when you have that many moving parts, it is a larger project than some of the other ones that you've ever taken on.
Well, I mean, the iPhone, they do have a lot of supply. It's a car miniaturized with many, fewer components individually, I'd say. But I think he could probably scale it up.
Yeah.
You have one supplier for a PCB, you have a battery supplier, you have a display supplier, touch element, and outer case, camera.
Everything on the motherboard.
Yep.
Or the logic board.
Manufacturing the chip.
Yeah.
Memory.
Right. Yes. So say that your BOM is, just to give you a wide range, 20 to 100 pieces.
Okay. Yeah.
Just hypothetically, right? Naming all of those large parts and large assemblies, and then you started naming some of the sub-assemblies and sub-parts that populate the board. So 2100.
Yeah.
Okay. A car is exponentially more.
Right. But I don't think Apple's going to be... I think what they plan to do would be to buy, larger modules piecemeal, kind of like, a battery here or an entire drivetrain, perhaps from BMW, and they can get their carbon fiber work done in the U.S. somewhere, or China, and just all they need really is a quality assembly plant. Which
the parts are not the difficult part; it's the brains of it and the design that are going to be the difficult part.
I don't know. I don't know if I would trust them to build a nice looking car. I'm not sure if it's one thing to build a sleek and exquisitely designed watch that it's minimalist, and it's another thing to scale that up 100 times into something that's rolling down the street and still looks it looks fast and it looks like it can handle the road. I mean, even just car companies themselves have trouble with it. And case in point, BMW's i3. I mean, they make a lot of beautiful cars, and they make something like that.
i8.
Right. I mean, it's just in the same lineup. So I don't know. I'm not sure how it's going to pan out.
So the advantage to an Apple car for me is, as a driver and passenger, is the electronics. Right? They know user interfaces, they know all the other bits, and so when we talk about a car, a modern car today has all kinds of different modules. There's of course the main ECU, but there's also all of the entertainment, there's all of the climate controls, there's all of each door gets its own computer for all of the telematics, and historically tying all of those things together has been atrocious, as Jeep learned this past week when Jeep had an exploit where they're now having to recall all of the Jeep vehicles.
GM had an exploit that came out today for OnStar, where people could hack into it and remotely call for assistance for a car.
Yeah, I removed OnStar from my car.
The smarter these cars get, the more vulnerable they are, and that Jeep one is terrifying. I mean, who would decide that the brakes and steering need to be tied into the infotainment system? The same thing that adjusts the volume on your stereo is going to be tied to the brakes on the car. Are you crazy?
So here's the thing, is that you have computers involved in brakes for over a decade now because you have anti-lock brakes.
Sure.
And so what they do is they mount a toothed gear on the axle and count the rotations of the axle, and when they can see that it's locking, that's when they release the brakes. Because they have a computer handling that, and they had computers everywhere else, the disconnect was when they tied that into other computers that were connected.
Yeah, you keep the systems separate. The fact that they're tied together
You'd say that you keep them separate, but this is CAN bus. This is car area networking.
Of course, this all...
And once it's networked, it's vulnerable.
And this all started once they had the fly-by-wire, drive-by-wire, like Mercedes has their...
The accelerator is computer controlled with potentiometer instead of being a cable or throttle linkage.
Yeah. So, I mean, instead of rack and pinion, you have something else. And
well, you still have a rack and pinion gear, but instead of being directly connected to a steering shaft, it's a motor.
Yeah, it's a motor.
All of the Saturn Ions...
I think it's a motor pinion.
Yeah, all of the Saturn Ions were recalled because the motor failed. And I was driving a Malibu rental car in Cupertino when I was out there one time visiting Apple, and the motor failed, and we lost power steering on the rental car.
Oh, that's awesome. That's excellent. Saturn.
Yeah, GM.
Oh,
good
it was
job.
a Chevy Malibu.
Terrifying.
They were all the same ones, but as it happens with recalls, they cover one model and don't cover another.
Right.
Even though it's the exact same part that failed across the different lines.
Well, it's how it's installed, obviously.
Oh, clearly.
And also the new Mercedes and Lexus stuff with the preemptive braking, or the primed braking. They prime your brakes for you if he sees you coming up on another vehicle object too quickly, it'll prime the brakes for you. And all that stuff is connected to computer.
Well, it's terrifying. I mean, imagine a hacked car. You're going 75 miles an hour and it slams on the brakes. You're dead.
Well, and the Wired article was really, really interesting because they actually did this on a highway.
Right.
They disabled the guy's brakes on the highway.
You call that interesting. I call that terrifying.
Well, what's really terrifying for me about that is what editor and writer thought this was a good idea for the article, right? I totally get if you want to demonstrate it in the high school parking lot on a Saturday when there are no kids around and you're the only one there. But You're going out on the highway and demonstrating this? Neil, would you have approved that article if I'd pitched it and said, I'm going to go out on the highway and these dudes are going to see if they can kill me?
No, I would rather not have one of my writers put themselves in harm's way in such a way. It's an extreme example.
It blows my mind that they thought it was a good idea and they did it and they ran it and acted like nothing's out of the ordinary here.
It gets the point across. It's terrifying.
I guess, but one of the things that it does, and it's going to be terrible, is it turns me into a bit of a Luddite, right? I have this car. I removed the OnStar brain from it entirely, and I installed CarPlay. I've got the infotainment stuff that I want, and I don't have the ability to call in an accident, but I have the automatic thing plugged into OBD, and if I get in an accident, it's going to send a text message to someone to come and get me anyway. I don't have the remote lock and unlock my doors, although I could add that aftermarket. But I don't have the car spying on me, and I don't have people able to remotely access it any longer.
Yes, but who among regular consumers are going to go through all that trouble?
Okay, so everybody, if you have a GM vehicle, the OnStar module is either in your trunk or in the passenger footwell or driver's footwell.
Rip it out.
And there are 3 connectors, potentially 4 if you have Bluetooth. There's an antenna, there's a Bluetooth antenna, and there are 2 other connectors that supply power and integration to the entertainment system.
Was it like removing HAL 9000?
It didn't cry.
Did it sing you a song?
It didn't sing it. Daisy, Daisy. No, it didn't sing Daisy.
Oh, that's too bad.
And it also didn't offer to play a game of chess.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know. If they can get it right, and if they can... the whole walled garden thing also comes into play here in the car. It would be great. I mean, they could solve a lot of problems with just having the control and management over everything.
Hang on. I'm getting an over-the-air update. I've got to update my car's firmware.
Okay, gotcha.
I'll be right back.
Hope you're not updating while you're driving down the interstate.
What if I am? Car's got to reboot. Hang on.
Yeah.
So, I don't have the Apple Watch. Neil, you have 2. Mikey, you have 1.
Yep.
You guys ran a story about the best aftermarket Apple Watch bands that you can buy.
Yes, I have a couple of the third-party bands that you can get on Amazon, and they're cheap. They look okay. I mean, if you're the type of person who wants to buy a $350 and up watch and put a $25, $35 band on it, you'll generally be pretty happy with it, I think. And if you are a high-end watch person, you're probably going to hate one of these bands. So the one knock against them, I would say, is I have a couple of metal ones here. I have they're both stainless steel. And
are they quote unquote stainless steel?
They're real. They're steel. They're heavy. And I have a black one to match a space gray sport watch, and then I have a that my wife has with her aluminum sport watch. And I mean, they work. They let you dress up the watch. They're quite a bit cheaper than Apple's $250 metal bands. They're obviously not as high quality as Apple's bands. The main problem I have with them is the sliding mechanism that goes in where you swap out the band is not as snug and comfortable of a fit when you slide it in as it is with an Apple band. So if you take an Apple band and you slide it in, there's no wiggle room. It feels pretty confident about how you're supposed to slide it in, and then it satisfyingly snaps into place, and it's good. With these, the rubber doesn't quite stick out as much where it slides, so you get a little bit of like a metal-on-metal feeling as you slide it in, and you can kind of put it in at a kind of wrong angle, and you have to take it out and try again and slide it back in. Once you slide it in, it's fine. It's good. But it is not precision engineered in the way that Apple's bands are. So it definitely has a quality issue, is what I would say. But what do you expect for $30? I didn't see any signs of damage to the watches or anything like that from using them. So if you want just a relatively cheap band to kind of dress up your Apple Watch, I think you'll be pretty happy with it.
Cool. And we have links in the stories to the ones that you purchased?
Yeah, the main one is that I have is the best reviewed on Amazon. And we're pretty happy with it. There are other options on there, leather bands. What we did was we just went through on Amazon and found all the Prime delivery options that were the highest star ratings from customers. And so there's just a list of them in there with different styles. And you can even get a adapter that allows you to just attach one of your own traditional style bands and snap into the Apple Watch if you have a band that you want to use on your own.
Nice. And just because I'm curious and a watch nerd, do you happen to know what millimeter spacing those lugs are on the ones that allow you to bring your own band?
They're removable.
Right, but it's the traditional watch bands are either 18, 20, 22, 24 millimeters wide at the lug.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a watch guy, so
So I don't know what you're talking about, man.
yeah, you'd have to
Look up
check
yourself,
out
bro.
the Amazon listings and see what it says on there. The one I have, the black one, is a little thinner than the one that my wife has in terms of the width of it. But they're both heavy and well made, and you can remove the lugs to resize them for your wrist.
All right, well, this has been the Apple Insider Podcast. We've had with us Neil Hughes.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys.
Awesome. And Mikey Campbell.
Pleasure as always.
Well, Neil, where can we find you on the internet?
You can read me at AppleInsider.com, and I'm on Twitter at ThisIsNeil.
And Mikey, where can we find you?
Apple Insider and on the Twitter machine at Mikey Campbell 81.
Brilliant. Well, if Mikey updates the firmware for his Takata airbag while he's driving down the road at 75 miles an hour, we'll be sure to let you know about it next week. This has been the Apple Insider Podcast.